So new business is going to be, I'm going to turn the floor over to Sarah. And for today's meeting, I'd like her to carry the meeting. And as she's got her presentation, and I don't want to interrupt her until she's got an opening. Oh, all right. Okay, good morning, Tyson, or good afternoon.
Hello, can you hear and see me, or either one?
Both, yeah. All of the above.
Cool. Wonderful.
So welcome to the Housing Committee. This is your formal introduction, and do you know everyone at the table? We've got, introduce yourself in case you don't know them. Starting with Ryan. You know.
Ryan Airy. Tyson, it's good to see you.
Hey, good to see you too, Ryan.
Jeff, good to see you, Tyson.
Hey, Jeff.
How's things?
Wonderful.
Good.
Siobhan Rich. Hi, Tyson.
Hello, Siobhan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Wonderful.
And then staff that's here. Starting with Sarah.
Hey, Tyson, I'm Sarah. I guess you can't see me. I'm the planner with the district, and I'm your two person for the Housing Committee, your support staff.
Wonderful. Thanks for all your communication.
Hi, Tyson. It's Scott Beeching. I'm the manager of development services. I think we've talked on the phone a couple of times, but yeah, I am Sarah's right-hand person in this meeting, left-hand person today.
Looking forward to meeting you in person finally.
Hi, Tyson. I'm here too, the corporate officer. We spoke this week. Nice to see you here.
Hey, thanks so much.
Tyson, so you've taken a look at the terms of reference of the purpose of the committee and gone through that. Do you have any questions?
I have quite a few questions, but I think just because of the timeline that I had, I'll wait to kind of get a more comprehensive list. But today I'd like to just sit back and listen and get a feel for the flow of the meetings.
Okay. And if you raise your hand, we'll be kind of watching for you. If you've got a question or a comment as we go through, we're going to be, Sarah's going to lead the conversation.
Okay.
And I'll hand it over to you now, Sarah.
Just to double check, since I was handing things out, have you already approved the agenda?
Have.
And adopted the minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so where are we at today? We're still informing development of strategies, but we've tried to accelerate that so we can get right to writing strategies. This was our schedule, which this would be the time to discuss changes to it. So we are on intro to tools now. So we did identification of partners, barriers and opportunities last meeting, May 5th, and then we've added an extra meeting today, May 19th, and we've jumped into intro to tools. So our next meeting in June, we'll probably still be talking about intro to tools, but not as much. So there's a few items that I wasn't able to include on this agenda that we could talk about as well. So our first meeting in June, we could do a little bit of intro to tools and start working on strategy development. And then from there, if you want to add another extra meeting, which is a bit challenging for me as your support staff to get everything together for you, we could have another meeting to talk more about the strategies. And then if we could leave it for 3 weeks or so that I can actually draft the strategy for you, like the document. And then we can look at moving up consultation, maybe in, what do you think, Scott? I'm just thinking about, there's all these, like there's the Canada Day event as far as consultation. And we've got some other stuff going on with the Parks Master Plan and this recreation consultation going on.
I don't think you have to worry about the other consultation because I think the stakeholders can be different. If this group wants to move the stakeholder consultation up into summer, that's a possibility, but I think most people are really busy in August. So September probably is a good goal for consultation.
Okay, maybe just as long as it's early, we keep it up at the front. Yes, Jeff?
I somewhat don't agree with that, sorry. Because September, everybody leaves. And there may be some people who are part-time residents or Airbnb in their places that are around here that might want to participate. So we seem to try to avoid the summer for the reason that everybody's in town. And that just does not make any sense to me because they're not going to come back for them.
So what is the format? What would be the format of that stakeholder consultation? Is that like an open house? Is it a Zoomable thing? So if we were to do it in August and people weren't here.
Yeah, so we can do it in both formats, right? So it could be, so we had some success doing like open house type, sort of workshop type consultation over Zoom. So we would have open house here in council chambers, but we could also do it in other places, right? We could talk to the senior center, or we could, you know, do little pop-ups in the park, like during events, to do the consultation that way and get verbal feedback. And we can also set up some way where people can write in, because not everyone's comfortable talking in person. But generally speaking, probably more like an open house type thing. And it can be accommodated on Zoom as well.
So that's stakeholder, or are you talking public?
I'm talking public.
Okay, so the stakeholder consultations would be more defined. Is that correct?
Let me get back here.
Okay.
This thing never worked the way I want it to work. Yeah, so stakeholder consultation would probably be more of like an actual workshop as opposed to an open house.
Okay.
And those kind of dates would be around their availability and potentially would be wholly over Zoom, depending, right?
Okay.
On measures, public health measures.
How much of a difference does that make whether you have one before the other? Like, could you do the public consultation in August where you've got a lot of those seasonal owners here at the same time? Like, would that matter if we did the public one first in the summer and then did the stakeholder consultation in September?
I don't think so. I think it just depends on how soon you want to deliver and go to council.
Yes, Jeff.
Well, the end of the month is a Wednesday, so I'm not sure. The September Labor Day is the 5th, so people are here till then. So, you know, if it was in that week of the 29th through the 2nd of September for the public, at least you're going to catch them while they're still here. We do have a council meeting on the 31st.
Okay.
I don't know why that says so, because that's a lot of council meetings in August. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, according to my phone.
Is there? That is a lot.
That's about 6 too many.
Okay. I know that for most of the seasonal people, and I'm just one person, that I know most of them will return prior to the school year happening. They're usually gone by the 3rd week in August. A lot of those seasonal people.
Right.
Getting set up and before the school year back to work. So we may miss them.
Alberta goes back a week earlier than our kids do too.
They generally go back before the long weekend.
Yeah, they go.
And then they get the long weekend off and yeah.
Then, sorry to
go ahead.
The 22nd through the 26th, which I'm positive that's that Wednesday, the 24th is our council meeting.
Okay.
Next my phone. Got a whole bunch of them.
Okay. So let's tentatively plan that then for the 25th. That would be the Thursday
of August.
August.
And you're wanting what to happen then? Are we having a meeting then, or are we talking about consultation?
Consultation
is not tied to.
Oh, not tied to any day or.
It's not tied to our.
Okay.
No. So you guys will be reviewing the document. We'll get it tweaked to where you think it's ready to show it.
Okay.
Right? and then we'll get comments back. Staff will make those changes and bring it back to the committee for review. Any changes before it goes, you would make a recommendation to send it to council.
Goes out. Well, I do like the idea of having pop-ups and getting public consultation throughout the summer. I think that's a really good idea because you may capture a lot of people for the public portion of it. So do we need to decide that date?
Those days do not need to be decided
Today. Okay.
It's more just when you want to see the outcomes of those.
Okay.
Like it's more has to do with when do you want to get this to council? So then what kind of timeline do we actually have for staff to do the consultation, make revisions, bring it back to the committee for review.
Okay, Jeff?
Through the chair, the big thing is that personally, my opinion is if you get the stakeholders consultation and then you have the public consultation, it's kind of backwards. You should actually find out what the public wants. And then when you go to the stakeholders, you actually might be armed with something about what they can or can't do, but the public input. So if you have the public input somewhere between the 19th and the 26th of August, and at least you're going to capture some people that are here, whether it's an online, it's that, what do you call it, some monkey thing you do?
The Survey Monkey. Yeah.
Survey Monkey, or it doesn't matter how you do it, but it's like we started the Planning and Development Committee. We had meetings with different planners before we ever got to that point to find out what it is that they wanted when we started with the zoning bylaws, because that's the group you want to invite to town. So if you should start with the public to find out what the public thinks they want as far as the housing goes. And then your stakeholders know what the community wants as a whole, and then you can pick how this is going to work.
Ryan, got any comments on that?
Chair, I'm not sure the public often doesn't know what they want. They want to comment on how it's going, and then they can say why they don't like it, and then we can say, well, here's the information.
But
yes,
it's not something that we can do with pop-ups, that we have information and that we say, you know, okay, if people know that there's budgets and, you know, everybody wants a 3-bedroom rancher on the lakefront, and, you know, that's not what we're offering. So if we say, here's some of the things we're offering, these are the reasons we're offering, and we have that at a pop-up, and we have staff members or whoever there giving out information and then saying, here's what is actually available, and this is kind of how it's going to work. And then here are your options, instead of just kind of having an open forum going, you know, what do you want? Because I want a house on a lake too, where I can have my horse. But, you know, that's not something that's within budget. And these are the reasons why, and explain, you know, here is, you know, we're dealing with the habitat and, you know, the DOS and CSRD, and these are all the people who are involved, and this is how we're going to make it happen. And then here kind of what are your options are. So, you know, would you think you would want to be like an apartment style? Would you be like, rather be like in a little community village townhouse style? What would you like in your neighborhood? It's coming. And same for the homeowners that were coming to your neighborhood with housing, who like, how do you see that? And I think we're better off going in like that than saying, what do you want? Right? So that we're prepared. And then I like the pop-up idea. And if, you know, I mean, if that's Canada Day or it's on a Main Street day where we've got lots of town people and tourists coming through, and we've got a tent set up with people that have information, I think we're going to get better feedback, and people are going to get it. We're giving information first. That's just me.
Yes, Jeff?
I think that's a fantastic idea, because the district does a barbecue on the August long weekend, and I think we're talking about doing it again this year. So, you know, everybody comes by there. You could have some of the information at that, where it's just it's people to actually look and make a comment about it. And then you're absolutely right. You have to give what the guidelines of what we're offering is, not the house on the beach.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. All right. I would agree. I agree too. I like the idea, and I like the transparency of also giving the public a say or hearing their comments while we're in the process, as opposed to being told afterwards what it would look like. This gives them a chance to participate, but yes.
And the biggest reason for wanting to do that is because like the storm that happened after the wellness center, and then the choice that happened with the habitat across the road over here, like, why do we move that there? Why do we do this? It's better to put it out in front, say, this is what we're talking about before we make our final decision. At least they're aware.
Yeah.
Well, and explaining our limited space, right? That, you know, if we had 10 billion bucks and endless space, but, you know, here's what we have for spaces. This is what our budget is. How can we make that comfortable for everybody, right? Like, we're trying, but we want your opinion, but how does that fit in and is workable? Because it's, you know, there are budgets and there is space issue in Sycamores. And maybe people will come back and say, hey, we would rather be out a bit further and we'd rather walk into town and have a little bit more land. You know, if you got $1 million, you can buy this big in town. You can buy this big, a little walkable in town, outside, you know, towards TNA or, you know, those positions. So, and finding out what people are more interested in.
Okay, Scott?
I think sounds like we're moving into planning of the stakeholder consultation.
Yeah.
And we're probably just talking about the schedule for this meeting and the next meeting. So every 15 minutes we spend today probably pushes the consultation back a week in 6 months. So
thank you. Okay, so that's enough information. I think that's good discussion for at least how we want to roll it out, that public part. So let's get back to your presentation, Sarah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is it sounds like we'll do our next meeting coming up in June, which is in a week, almost 2 weeks roughly. We'll finish off intro to Jules, we'll roll into strategy development, and then we won't have an extra meeting. Will give me some time to put together what we've come up with so far. I'll bring that to you folks at the next meeting. You can review it then, and then from there we can decide if we need an extra meeting to come back to talk about changes. We'll revisit then. As far as consultation goes, I think it'll mostly be spearheaded by staff, and we'll take what the committee has come up with, and that's what we'll present to the public for feedback. Okay, right? So we'll have a range of strategies for a range of different needs. Housing provided through a variety of avenues. Okay. Perfect. So here's what we have so far, guys. I do have new posters put up on the walls, which will be easier to read from where we're sitting. So here's our statement that we have so far. Here's our working goals that we're working with. We have 3 goals. Here's our potential partners that we identified last meeting.
Scott, can I have you tip that screen so it's facing this way a little bit more? Thank you.
Here's all our barriers and opportunities we mapped out last session. Hey, we're getting some feedback somewhere. Is there someone online that maybe needs to mute themselves?
Tyson, are you muted?
Thanks, Tyson. Okay, and we've got a few strategies that we've kind of been spitballing in between things, so I've just got them documented here for now. Approve library plans, seek partnerships with landowners that want to leave a legacy, increase density and low density residential areas through zoning and land use designations, take advantage of changes in the BCBC for multi-family housing, work with employers to develop worker housing, i.e. funding, support the development of co-op housing. We've got so far just kind of on the back burner. So tools. So today we're mostly talking about tools that are available to local governments that can be implemented through local government bylaws and policies. So official community plans. So this was what all those papers from the province were about. Just these basic little short descriptions. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to put something together for you guys that was shorter, but I gave you the simplest things I could. So what an official community plan is, it describes the long-term vision of the community for moving forward into the future. It may include guidance on matters that affect housing. This would include policies on housing, such as housing affordability, rental housing, and special needs housing. So in terms of our strategy, that might be one of our strategies built in there is update that portion of the official community plan that talks about housing, right? So there's some examples here that I pulled from other communities that was in the documentation I gave you folks. So policies regarding rental housing and home ownership for young families and first-time home owners. We can get really specific. So those are people that we've identified as needing housing in our community. Statements regarding the fostering of partnerships, supporting infill, waiving certain charges for affordable housing developments, supporting compact development. There's kind of a whole list. So this is done through land use designations and development permit areas. So what the land use designations do, they're these really broad mapped areas that tell us generally this is where we want housing. And we can set density targets on that, for example. And then what development permit areas do is they will apply to specific types of development. So it's not necessarily tied to a land use designation and can be triggered in other land use designations that support the same type of development. So when we talk about housing, that's going to specifically apply to multifamily or intensive residential development only, just so you're aware. And it's only for forming character. It doesn't allow us to get super specific about what the building looks like. There can be more general things because it's not meant to affect housing affordability. So with development permit area guidelines in a town center, we can be much more specific, be like, it must be nautical. I want to see this many spaceships. I want to see, not quite that specific. They're not guidelines, right? Like they're not hard rules. They're guidelines. A key one with official community plans would be infill housing, like we were talking about, looking at our land use, our low density land use designation and upping it to say medium density perhaps, to support more infill housing. So what is infill housing? It could be a new home on an empty lot. It could be adding secondary dwellings, so our OCP already supports that, so is their zoning. Replacing single family dwellings with duplexes or fourplexes. So this could be full on knockdown redevelopment, or it could be conversion. Look at converting older big homes into more units. And then the other one is subdividing to create more building lots. So where we change those density targets, so this X number of units, or it could perhaps look at things like parcel size. It starts to kind of open up properties that are sort of ripe for that to happen, where, you know, they've fallen in disrepair or they're just long vacant lots. They can become candidates for further subdivision or intensification. So zoning bylaws. So zoning bylaws implement the official community plan, and they're a lot more specific. So we'll have these broad areas that say residential, and then we may have more specific zones that specify form of housing, right? So right now we've got maybe 3 forms of housing in our zoning, and we could perhaps create more potentially, where we start to get an idea of where those kinds of forms would make sense and in terms of intensification in our neighborhoods. So zoning is a practice of dividing land into different areas according to use. So similar to an OCP, residential, commercial, right? So residential uses can be different zones, each permitting a slightly different type of housing, like I was just saying. So you could have zoning specifically for townhouses. So that zone would be built to limit height, so we don't go up more than, say, 2 stories. And it can have different kind of setbacks. So we can have a 0 lot line, so we can support freehold row housing through party wall agreements, for example. So we can also zone for apartment buildings. And we can be more specific around like maybe only 2 to 3 stories, sort of something that seems more of a better fit for our community as opposed to something really tall that you would see in a more urban area. And it also would limit the requirement for elevators as well, which can increase affordability because those are not cheap, for example. So we can also zone for fourplexes, and we can design a zone that helps to create a form and character that isn't just a block, an ugly square block, right? So we can set it up so that it staggers and looks more interesting and perhaps fits better into a pre-existing single family neighborhood. And we can also zone for congregate living / assisted living, which would be more like seniors housing, special needs housing, and that can protect that type of housing. So another thing that can be built into zoning bylaws is density bonusing. And that's a voluntary system of exchange between a developer and the local government. So the developer gets something and the local government gets an amenity. And so this is density. So we're talking about, say, number of units or floor area. And you can say, well, you can get this much more density as a bonus if you provide X number of affordable housing units, right? So in the case of the Best Western project that Scott was telling us about, was that last meeting? Mm-hmm. It could be like, well, you can have an extra 20 units that you can use either as, you know, apartments or short-term rentals, because it's a hotel, right? If you give us 10 affordable housing units subject to a housing agreement, like registered on title, and those are locked down and they're perhaps, you know, subject to a housing society saying who can live there. Another way, as opposed to a specific number of affordable housing units, could be an amenity. So it could be that the buildings are built for high energy efficiency, which is an amenity for the people who live there. It reduces their cost of home ownership as far as electricity, for example, or their water bills. The other way that can work is funding towards amenities or affordable or special needs housing. So, for example, contributions to a housing fund. So, and then the other one that we've got on here is parkland dedication. So that doesn't have to be used. So that's subdivision. There's these rules about, you know, if you make X number of lots or this size, then there's a requirement that you dedicate parkland or give cash instead of parkland. Council decides, right? Council might not want parkland in that particular location. So they might take cash instead. But you can also do that for affordable housing. It doesn't have to be for park. So they can contribute affordable housing or land for affordable housing or cash in lieu of. And that's through our subdivision regulations, which can be in our zoning bylaw.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Right, okay.
Yeah, well, after this section, we'll see if we have any questions or comments. That's okay.
I know the councillors in the room are pretty familiar with a lot of this.
I know. Yeah, I feel they are too. So,
so incentives for housing, there's a few different incentives. So development cost charges, party wall agreements, and property tax exemptions. So development cost charges are taken.
Did you want to discuss the OCP and the zoning tools? Is that?
No, I just wanted to pause to just see if Siobhan had a question or like, I know I've given you sort of control of stopping it, but I said I might interrupt. Okay.
So development cost charges are taken for certain types of development to help fund servicing infrastructure so that we can upgrade our services. So things like lighting, our water system, roads, sewer, right? And that's how we fund and upgrade those services so that they can keep up with the pace of development, or as they age and they become too old and they need to be replaced. There are certain types of developments that are exempt from development cost charges anyway. So for example, and so this is something we would consider when developing our strategy. If you're doing fewer than 4 self-contained residential units, right? So perhaps apartment buildings or townhouses that are in blocks of 4 or less, it's like 3 to 4, they'd be exempt from development cost charges, right? So we could create a program through our zoning or OCP policies that would support parcel sizes that would allow for that. Am I making sense? The other one is where the units are no larger than 29 square meters, which is pretty small, 312 square feet. So say micro suites. Mm-hmm. So if someone is doing micro housing as part of their development, those could be exempt from development cost charges. So that could be an incentive for a developer to provide them. So we had one at the Planning and Development Committee recently where they suggested instead of commercial space, they could do some micro suites. Those are automatically exempted from development cost charges. Council can also make a decision to waive or reduce development cost charges for specific things. So, and they can do it based on zoning or specific areas in town. Or they could do it based on floor area. So where there's small, the unit is smaller, which makes it more affordable, fees can be reduced or waived. So the policy can be that the district would do it for not-for-profit rental housing. They would do it for supportive living housing for seniors, right? Or special needs, affordable rental housing, or subdivision of small lots that would result in low greenhouse gas emissions. So intensive developments, sort of like Parksville, for example. If the development is designed for low environmental impact. So it could become an incentive for a waterfront property to provide some units where they are consolidating their development upland of the water and doing something that's going to environmentally enhance the foreshore along the lake. If I'm making sense there. So the other incentive is party wall agreements. So this is something that our current zoning bylaw actually already supports. A lot of local governments weren't using them because when the property sold, that agreement didn't transfer. And that was kind of a liability for the local government and for property owners, right? And so what party wall agreements are is when you have two fee simple lots and you build right to the lot line. You don't follow a setback. So there were some changes, I think in 2014 to the Land Title Act, that they now transfer with ownership with the property, which secures them. And what that does is would support row housing. So you could create smaller fee simple lots. Each one would contain a home that's to the lot lines, still has a rear yard and a front yard, subject to a party wall agreement. And what that does is allows for smaller builders like we have in Sycamore, who are more familiar with building single family dwellings as opposed to multifamily at this point, it's more straightforward for them and it makes more sense for them. And they can do it on a one at a time basis, if that makes sense. The other thing is it avoids the creation of a strata, which can be a disincentive for first-time homeowners or people who are downsizing. They might not want to get involved with a strata. So they're not looking for it. It's not a housing type that they're looking for because they'd be dealing with a strata. It can be a disincentive. The other bonus, which is like long in the future, is that over time, it's easier to consolidate that land. You don't have a strata in place, right? So all those lots could be taken and redeveloped for even higher density down the road, decades down the road. That making sense. You don't have to try to dissolve a strata or buy out each strata owner to reclaim that land. So that's pretty cool. So it supports row housing is what it does. The other item is property tax exemption. So the district currently has a revitalization tax, so we already have the ability to put this in place. The district has been talking about reviewing and revising and updating that to be more effective. So some changes with the regulations that allow us to do that are that it no longer has to be tied to a specific area designated in the official community plan, which makes it a lot more flexible, this tool. How it works though is the district will have an agreement with a property owner. There'd be an agreement, and then that's how you become exempt to certain taxes or have a reduced tax rate. So you can use it to encourage affordable housing or construction and preservation of affordable rental housing. Because if you keep the taxes low, someone can keep renting a property to someone. They're not paying higher taxes and therefore not necessarily needing to increase their rent, if that makes. Yeah.
Yeah.
See nods. Okay, good. So for example, the city of Victoria has a policy that the staff can use that permits exemptions for specific properties. So you can go through and identify these specific properties as opposed to your official community plan, specific properties. Okay. I'm just trying to get the slide to advance. There we go. So our last one here, and I'm sorry I didn't have time to fluff this out with the power outage, is the standards of maintenance bylaw. So this is something that came out of our housing needs assessment. The consultant identified an emerging issue with, I can't remember the terms they used, basically housing that's available, it's falling into disrepair. And so we can end up with renters housing that's not adequate. So like the plumbing is failing, there's, you know, the walls are rotting, the basement leaks, these kinds of things. So what a standards of maintenance bylaw addresses are these types of issues. So it's not about a property being beautiful, it's about a property being safe and secure and right. So there was an example attached from the District of Houston. And that's the type of thing that we could use. So that's the last item for this particular topic.
Okay, and any questions, comments? Sean? No? Jeff?
I want to back up a little bit to your app, like you've had it out of, this is our district of sale.
It is, so that's our next topic.
Well,
our next topic is this
okay,
bylaw.
I'll leave that.
Okay.
But to go back through your previous comment, your partners are top of the list, District of Sycamore. So right now the District of Sycamore has purchased the land to build a wellness center on. We purchased the land across the street for $1 billion and change to provide affordable housing. Then we turn around and you're going to ask private individuals on a density bonus, but we're going to waive the DCCs, waive the property taxes, expect the District of Sycamore to somehow buy and donate the land or be involved in it. And then we're going to maintain our services, which you touched on about our water, sewer, roads, and infrastructure. My question is that when we do all this is a great idea, but when after you're done doing all this, where are you going to get the money to offer the services that the taxpayers are paying for if our tax dollars are all going to affordable or attainable or assisted living houses? Like, I caution that we need to be careful with the puts. The only reason I support the one across the street is because it has commercial space at the bottom of it. And somehow when that model is done, that commercial space should still be a taxable piece of property to the District of Sycamore. Maybe the rest of the building, but that base should be taxable property to the District of Sycamore, because if we keep offering up all the lands that you have marked out on that map, and we lose all the tax revenue, all the DCCs on it, how are we supposed to put in infrastructure? Exactly.
Right. So we wouldn't necessarily be doing that for everyone, right? So we've identified properties that are potential sites, and we can look at that. That's meant for us to look at with one of our committee members wanted to look at the zoning bylaw to see where we could implement some changes, perhaps later after it's adopted. We don't know that we have time now, but it's sort of that kind of relationship. We're going to be comparing and going from there. But there's lots of other tools as well, right? Where we can take funds to put into a housing fund, right? To start building that up. And then our next meeting, we're also going to talk about things like land trusts and co-ops. So which are other ways of acquiring land or defraying the cost of land. So, and I think it takes a mix of strategies.
Okay, I was going to say, and one of our purposes is to make sure we cover the housing continuum. So it's not all just about the affordable housing, although that's a huge piece of it, and rental housing. And so just,
it's also creating market housing that has a lower cost, right? In areas where there's already existing infrastructure. So it was one of the exercises we did last meeting. We had a bunch of different maps, and one of them was our utilities map. So where is there already infrastructure? So when we start talking about infill, say in the tree streets, adding density there's existing infrastructure for like one-off kind of projects throughout the tree streets. Wouldn't necessarily require it. But then when we start talking about Main Street or Riverside, where we have existing high density zones, that's when the question starts to come up. We have to start talking about capital projects and funding these things to get them off the ground.
yes, Jeff.
Yeah, sorry. My biggest concern is with our Airbnb or short-term rentals. Every single person that I talked to said that they're doing a short-term rental because they had it as a rental property, and they're done with renters. They're just done because the rules stipulate what the rights the renter has and what rights the property owner has, which are not ever in the favor of the property owner. So when you create these systems and you talk about private industry doing it, like other than the hotel that's talking about 6 or 10 units, which we've approved but still haven't got a commitment on. They're there to manage it. It may or may not work. But if I had a property where we lived in the tree street and I built my 680 square foot or 800 square foot cottage in the back as a rental unit, once somebody's in there, it's very difficult to deal with them. I mean, the original design of that backyard thing was for your parents or somebody to age in place, you know, with basically a home care there, which is our next biggest concern. So I just get very nervous when we start offering up a lot of benefits that are money's required for the district to actually operate.
Right. And I hear what you're saying. And I think a lot of that comes into play with like the bigger developments, right? When we start talking about larger, like higher density multifamily units, for sure. And certainly part of the strategy is intended to support home ownership for people. So there'd be a range of housing types, and being able to support someone in home ownership. They can either have a mortgage helper long-term rental unit, or as our new zoning bylaw is contemplating, as a short-term rental unit. And all it's doing is supporting that family in being in their own home, right? So it's not necessarily providing housing, but it's an opportunity to provide housing. And I think the other ways would be through subdivision. You create new lots, they're smaller, and that makes them more accessible to first-time homeowners, for example, right? And I think a lot of what this bylaw, the new one currently does, is looks at providing a certain number of units that might be rental, and the rest are for market, for example, right? And what we may end up with is perhaps through our housing strategy, we recommend the creation of, or we identify a potential partner to manage those units that we acquire through that process in terms of managing the tenancy agreements. And am I making sense? Okay. So the new zoning bylaw, I'm going to let Scott go ahead and present this.
Didn't warn me.
The mouse.
You didn't warn me. There's someone on the chat. I thought it was Tyson. And Tyson says, as I discussed with Sarah, I won't be able to attend the full meeting today. I'm very happy to sit on this committee for the housing committee in Sydney. So I think we lost Tyson.
Okay. All right. I'll reach out to him later.
I'll give Sarah the mouse back.
He doesn't want it. You touched it. Okay, so our new zoning bylaw. So we were talking about a few of the strategies that are already proposed. So that bylaw has had second reading. It is not 100% finalized at this point. So the next step with it would be that it would go for public hearing, which is a further opportunity for consultation. and feedback. So it could change again potentially, and may have to go back for second reading again if it changes significantly before it goes for third reading. Okay. And it won't be adopted at that point either. It still has to go to MOTI, Ministry of Transportation, just so you're aware. So September, maybe we might have a new bylaw, but the process is happening. So our ability to affect that process right now is pretty limited probably, especially because of the type of consultation we should do if we're contemplating things like increasing density through our land use designations in the OCP. So that might be a 1 or 2 year process after this is adopted. But this is what we got in place already. There's things that our OCP, official community plan, already supports. So there are some places we need to do amendments before the bylaw is adopted, but it's based on our OCP, generally speaking. So here's some things that have been built in, and this is what I gave you. So I gave you definitions of some of the different types of housing in there. And I gave you some specific zones that are specifically for residential uses, as well as some of the general regulations that regulate some of those uses. So things like accessory suites or short-term rentals. So we've added a use called employee dwelling unit. And that would be something that you would see perhaps here in the town center or on the highway or in the industrial areas, so that you can have an employee or the owner, the way it's defined allows for the owner as well, to live on site. So it can support new businesses that are growing to limit their overhead. But it also gives business owners an opportunity to provide housing to attract and retain skilled employees locally in town, because that was an issue that was identified on our housing needs assessment. So the other one that was added is employee accommodation. And what that is more of a shared accommodation for multiple workers, where they would be sharing a kitchen and a living area and a laundry facility. And then they'd have their own individual bedrooms. I can't remember if there were regulations about how many people per bedroom. Some places do, they'll be like no more than 2, just to keep it livable. So you'll see it in like our farm zones, farm workers, for example. And you'll see it in our more kind of resort tourist zones, like our houseboat zone and our resort zone. So that allows them to bring in employees during the season. They can have a place for them to live. So the other one is secondary dwelling units. So we currently already allow them, but in limited contexts, in limited places. So right now, our single family zone only allows it as a secondary suite that's within the home. It has to be like in the basement or an addition to the house. It's part of the house. You're sharing a wall potentially, or a ceiling with your tenants. So what we've done is kind of open that up, and it can be in any of 3 formats. It can be in your basement, attached to your house. Attachment no longer has to be a shared wall. It can be a roof with a maximum amount of space between. I think it's like 3 meters, right? So it could be a breezeway. It can be part of an accessory building, such as a garage, and that's not limited to a carriage house, which would typically be above. It could be beside, right? So now you've got a unit that is accessible for someone maybe who's in a wheelchair, like a mother-in-law suite. And then the other format is, we're calling it a garden suite or a garden cottage. I can't remember the term, but that's where your entire accessory building is the secondary dwelling unit. So it doesn't have to be part of another accessory building on the property. So that's permitted in most zones. It's limited in zones like the one for Parksville, the R3, because it's intensive. I think it has to be within the house there. I don't think it can be a separate building just because the lots are really small. Same with the lots that are zoned for mobile homes. So we do have some fee simple properties in town that are strictly zoned for mobile homes. Attached only, just because of the way the code works for manufactured homes or mobile homes, you can't actually have a suite inside it. So 2-unit dwellings, which we all know as duplexes, that's currently a permitted use in all our residential zones, like our low density ones, like our 1 and 2. It's an alternative to a dwelling with a secondary suite. So you can either have your main house that would be bigger and a smaller secondary house, or you can have 2 larger main houses that are of equal size. So your density is no more than 2 in our low density land use designations right now. We've got the distinction between mobile homes and modular homes. So currently mobile homes are not allowed as a single family dwelling unit in most residential zones. They're relegated to zones specifically for mobile home parks, or that one-off zone where they're on fee simple lots. So they're not currently contemplated as affordable housing and permitted everywhere in that sense, if I may. So modular homes, those are permitted as a single family dwelling in all zones. And a modular is built to a different manufacturing code. It's not on wheels. It just comes to the property in pieces and is assembled on site on a typical foundation. So those can be a bit more affordable because they're manufactured off site. There's some savings in like labor and materials because they're able to reuse more things. So, and then the other type of housing we have is multifamily. So, and that zone is covering off medium to high density. It's covering that whole full range of townhomes or 4plexes or 3plexes, all the way up to condos like the Legacy, where you have several floors, right? So it's a really broad zone right now. That's the R5 multi-unit residential zone. And that's basically all I have to say about it. Like, it's covering everything. It's covering seniors housing, apartments, condos, patio homes, covers the whole gambit. It's non-specific and non-prescriptive.
Yeah, we have a couple questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm just going to see if there was another slide for it.
Jeff, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. When you mentioned garden suites, I know that when you're talking R5 and you're doing townhouses, on a townhouse, each has to have its own water and sewer connection, all right? 4plex, is that the same thing, Scott, that they all have to have their own hookup?
Each unit, I don't believe we have any rules about the connection. At the building permit stage, you have to prove you can provide that connection. But R5, like the Legacy
Townhouses or whatever, like what we're talking about over at Temple, rows of R5.
Right, I don't think we would necessarily require a separate curb stop for each unit.
Would it depend on whether or not there's common property associated with it?
It could, but basically what Daryl would probably like to see is one connection to the property line, and then what happens on the other side of the property line, as long as it's metered, I don't think we need to be involved in it, as long as it meets plumbing code, right?
Yeah, because I know we just had a meeting about 2plex being turned into a 4plex, and by our meeting, it was supposed to have had its own water and sewer separate, but the whole building is basically on one, like each sides are on one, okay? So and then we had a discussion about garden suites some time ago, and at that time, the garden suite, which it was ridiculous that you were going to have to put in a separate water and sewer connection. Is that still the way it is?
It doesn't need to be. So after talking with Kelly, in terms of how our fee schedule for those services work, it's just based on volume. It's not based on type or anything like that. So it doesn't matter if it's separate or not, they're still going to be paying the same. It's just based on volume of water and the size of your connection.
But you weren't allowed to hook the one in if it was a separate garden suite. Like, for example, the property on the road, they put in their own water and sewer to hook up at a lift station. They put a trailer there for their parents. I don't know whether that ever got settled, but it was like a year to determine whether they could actually hook that trailer on the property, save water line, save this. But I don't know what the actual outcome of it was. I could ask Craig, but
yes, Scott.
I know our zoning bylaw isn't gonna regulate that. We're not gonna regulate the number of connections. Our zoning bylaw just says you can have this on this property, and then it would be up to you to meet, you know, we have our water and sewer regulations, so it'd be up to them to meet the water and sewer regulations and building code, but our zoning bylaw is not going to regulate connections.
So the reason
It just requires them in certain cases, but not number of.
But that's why I'm bringing it up, is because we're just going through our subdivision services bylaw. And if we're going to do this as an affordable option for housing, create cottage suites, garden suites, whatever, we should address it at that time in conjunction with this before we start adopting things. Because to go back and amend it afterwards or make it that, like, why would I build a garden suite to get rental income and have to pay upwards of $6,000 to connect, like on a property that already, whereas if I put a roof breezeway in and add an addition to it, I don't have to do any of that. I'm just saying there's a few things that don't make any sense.
From what I understand, our bylaws are not requiring that.
The subdivision service bylaw?
Yeah. I mean, it's up to a property owner. If they decided they wanted an extra water meter because they wanted to build their tenants specifically for their use, that's up to them.
Yeah, okay. But I think the only comment I would have is that as a property owner, you're going to decide when you're doing this, if you're building a secondary suite or a carriage house for somebody to stay in, there are costs associated with that. And if you want to meter it and add its own, then it's up to you to do that. I think the long term, it has to be thought of as in the long term, your investment over time, as opposed to the upfront cost, because you want it to be efficient for you for renting out, and you don't want to be trying to divide it up. So I think each individual owner, if they're going to do a carriage suite, will determine whether or not they want a separate line, if it's even possible, right? I mean, we're talking regulatory, but that's not us, but we have to fall into that strategy.
That was our,
right.
Our subdivision service bylaw applied to that one specific property address that I mentioned. They were not allowed to do it. It took a year of arguing, and I don't know whether we allowed it for that single piece of property or we actually amended the subdivision services bylaw. That's my question.
Okay.
So what we could do is have a part of our strategy would be like a recommendation that council directs staff, but this would be in the strategy. We're not asking for this now, right? Review bylaws to make sure that they match and fit with our goals in terms of providing housing. So to look for things like that would be disincentives to increasing our number of housing units for residential use. That could be one of our strategies.
Yeah,
right?
It makes sense.
Yeah, well, like I said, if I was going to build it, everybody complains about that. If they're putting in a secondary suite as a rental suite or whatever, and they have to have a separate connection, they just walk away because it's like $6,000 a cost to a lot that's already serviced with water and sewer. Like, why would you have to do that?
Okay. Anybody else?
No, let's keep going.
All right. So for the case study for today, instead of bringing you guys another example housing strategy, because I think we're doing really well coming up with strategies. You guys are on fire. I decided to have a look at this. So this came up last meeting, infill housing. Ryan was pretty excited about this. And I thought it was great. So Metro Vancouver actually hired someone to do a case study looking at infill housing and how to do it. And so what this document does is it looks at a number of different examples throughout BC, which is fantastic. So you can kind of see different housing forms that have come up through that. So if you look in Appendix A, take a look, Siobhan. It could be interesting for housing co-ops. Siobhan's really interested in housing cooperatives. So an infill project that's a housing cooperative could be cool. Anyways, they came up with some great lessons after going over all these other municipalities' experiences with these particular examples. So number one, if you're going to increase density through your OCP and zoning bylaw, early community consultation, important. Neighborhood for it. Start talking with them in advance, figuring out what kind of formats are going to be well accepted and have a form and character that's going to fit well in that particular neighborhood. So the other thing, the other lesson was, yeah, do pre-zone sites to support it. Because when you're talking about infill, they're typically smaller pieces of land. And the people who are going to be interested in developing those are going to be smaller developers, which is kind of what we have in Sycamoose, right? We don't have companies that build huge buildings typically. So our own homegrown developers do smaller sites. That's what they know and are comfortable with. So if you pre-zone them, it's going to be easier for them to move forward with something. Provide detailed design guidelines. So that would be through our development permit areas in our official community plan. In consultation with the community. So that's, again, how do you make these buildings have a form and character that fits in the neighborhood? Doesn't seem out of place or, you know, has more acceptance. Advanced planning for neighborhood amenities. So this is what Jeff was talking about. Make sure that you have what you need for that increased number of residents. So this is things like parks. Are you going to end up needing sidewalks? Like, because what kind of housing is it, right? Do you need sidewalks? Is it an area where sidewalks are necessary? So maybe in the tree streets, not, but if it's fronting on, say, Larch Avenue or fronting on any of our highway frontage roads, 97A, you probably want a sidewalk. People are driving a bit faster there, right? Kids are walking to school along there. You know, we could be talking about some seniors who downsized trying to use the crosswalk to get across the 97A to get into town. So do advanced planning in terms of capital budgets that might need to be, right, to prepare an area for that. Have detailed, clear, and unambiguous zoning that supports the design guidelines. So in our development permit area, it's kind of like the pie in the sky, like this is what we're hoping to see. And then the zoning sets out the structural rules that are going to help support that, right? So an example is our R4 hillside zone, which is for Bayview. Garages have a different setback than the front of your house. Front of your house can be closer to the street. Your garage has to be a lot further back because they didn't want snout houses up there, right? So we can regulate that through things like setbacks. We can also regulate it through things like site area, minimum or maximum floor areas. So setting a maximum floor area in the zoning, for example, is going to keep units affordable because they're smaller, right? Right. We could say, you know, maybe there's a prescription of a use, right? For every 3, you must have X number this size, for example. There's a number of ways it can go. So really clear, detailed, unambiguous zoning, which I think is where our current zone that covers everything is kind of ambiguous. It just leaves it open for the developer to come up with kind of what they want in terms of type and format, right? But we have specific needs for type and format. So perhaps we need to be more specific. Establish density targets based on neighborhood fit, financial viability, and desirable form. So in our official community plan, we would perhaps rejig our land use designations where they lay, and we would also establish density targets. So for this land use designation, up to a maximum of this many units per hectare, right? Or it might be, and it could also include, or it might be minimum and maximum parcel sizes. Set a maximum parcel size. Encourage the parcels to be of a smaller size that are more affordable. And it also would support a form that's actually financially viable for someone to build out, right? Like you need to have a density where your payoff is going to work for the developer. Encourage densities and housing forms that provide new rental units on freehold sites. So this is where that the row housing with the party wall agreements comes from. So is that,
can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Just so that I'm clear. So that, are you saying then you could take 4 smaller lots? Or, you know, if a developer wanted to buy 4 lots and increase the density by doing row housing and actually put 7 units on 4 lots?
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're?
Kind of the idea.
Kind of the concept, okay.
Concept in our case is more, we've got these one-off sites throughout, say that,
okay,
for example, the tree streets. I know it comes up a lot, but there's a few sites, right? You could do, say, 3 or 4 on a tree street lot, just because of their size. They're fairly big. You could actually fit quite a few, and they'd still have, you know, parking in the front and a yard in the back. Great for families.
Jeff, question?
Yes, or just a comment through the chair. On Shuswap Avenue, there's a form and character of a place that has a red door on the front of it. Something Shuswap Avenue.
Yes.
It's a park model trailer. But because their zoning bylaws allowed it to be there, it's there. But the houses on both sides are houses of 1,800 square feet. So now I got a house that I just built in the tree street. My neighbor's got a piece of crap that he sells. And the next thing I got is I got this 2-story, 4 laneway with 4 parking spots in the front. What do you think just happened to the value of my property, being the guy next door?
So this is part of what the consultation process is about, right? That was one of our barriers that we identified. It was NIMBYism, people concerned about property value. So actually having a look at that and considering, is that actually the case? Does it affect property value? It will affect amenities locally. You got more people living in town. Suddenly we have coffee shops that are open year round, right? Because there's enough people to support that business.
Ryan, you want to go first? Go ahead.
Sure. I was looking at the infill housing in those Vancouver studies. Some of them looked really good, but it did look like places where they probably had transit accessible. I see a big barrier to fourplexes being the amount of parking that's required when you build a fourplex to have 6 spots available on a half-acre property where we thought we could fit a fourplex suddenly, but not much lawn there.
Jeff.
Yeah, sorry through the chair. You know the duplex that we allowed to be a fourplex before the 2 new orders are there?
I don't think it's adopted yet, but council's considering it. Yes, I know the building you're talking about. Yeah.
That was a junkyard. And they went in and they cleaned it up and they did a fantastic job because it had 2 people renting and 2 other people renting. Those suites, but that's been a fourplex for a long time. Okay. And I go down to Pell, not to throw out anything, but there's an apartment there that's been built. I don't think it's as old as the Queast here on Main Street, but it's a skinny 8 or 9 suiter down there.
I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
And again, I'd be pulling every day if I was a neighbor to that. And that's all I'm saying is that when you allow that type of building and you want that lower rent point, the type of people that you attract in there, I don't think that necessarily you want that next door to your 700.
Are they going to be rentals though, right?
Well, are they going to be rent? That's what you have to decide, is if they're going to be rentals or they're going to be affordable for sale. And the parking is because everybody I know has got 2 vehicles. If there's a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, girlfriend, they both have their own vehicles. And sometimes one of them doesn't start 50% of the time. So when you got you took that lot this wide and you put, your no wall thing in there to get your 4 units on that lot. And you got exactly 4 stalls in front. And in Sycamore, there's no street parking, especially in the winter.
Right. So this is one of the things that would be contemplated, like in reviewing bylaws, right? What bylaws need to change to support intensification? And part of it is consultation, right? And educating the public, like this is where Sycamore is. It's in the mountains, it's in a valley, it's impact, like there's steep slopes in terms of available land, right? It's ALR. So we have the land base that we have, and the only way to get more housing is to intensify it, add more density, right? So the expectations we currently have will have to shift and change a bit and be accepting of potentially allowing on-street parking in our residential neighborhoods, and where you have, I can't remember what they call it, but you end up taking turns passing, right? So bigger municipalities have had to go through road diets, right? So in residential areas, it becomes, and one of the benefits of it is it slows traffic down, for example, right? And I think all I'm saying is expectations of what our neighborhood looks like, will have to change. And I think in an infill context, there are sort of one-off sites throughout the neighborhood, and it's not necessarily the whole neighborhood.
Is there an opportunity then, to, like as in newer residential development, we've got a maximum lot coverage for buildings and accessory buildings?
Mm-hmm.
Could that also be the same case, like say within the tree streets, because you're not trying to really change, you don't really want to change the form and character of the community as much. So taking one lot and putting in 4 units may not behoove the neighborhood, but doing 2 units might work, where they're kind of set back and they look like they're created as.
I think it depends on where the cost benefit is right now, right? With the cost of constructions, like maybe you need at least 3 to make that worthwhile, because our bylaws currently allowed 2.
4 is, I think 4 is the map,
right?
Okay, yes, Jeff?
You've lived here around this area for a while, right, Sarah? Like, this last winter wasn't indicative of the amount of snow that we can get. We got quite a bit, but I've seen 5 times that amount here. And if you're gonna allow street parking and we can weave by one another, I mean, as little as 6 or 7 years ago, the snow was piled up as high as my truck roof. So where do you propose the district cleans the roads to go down there? Like the city of Calgary, Vancouver's different. They don't get snow but a couple times a year, right? But the city of Calgary is atrocious. They don't clean any of their streets. And so getting around on their streets and parking on the street is but here, Revelstoke, the freaking snow's piled up as high as the hotel roofs are. If you don't consider, because if you look by creating a housing project in a place where we have streets like the tree streets or the Cottonwood area, all that over there, you're now going to make it onerous for the district of Sycamoose is going to have to go with a loader and pick up the snow and put it in a dump truck and haul it away. Just because one fourplex wants to park on the road.
So I think what it comes down to, we're just coming up with, these are different strategies that could be implemented in the housing strategy that the committee is going to come up with, right? And they're not implemented until council receives it and directs staff to implement components of it. So not all components, council might not be in favor of all components, right? Or it might limit, perhaps we end up with a parking bylaw that allows, you know, in specific areas, we could have something more complicated than we currently have potentially. And like that's up to council to contemplate as far as implementation. So I think like right now it's, you know, we're spitballing ideas for sure. Yes, discuss the pros and cons, but don't let it stop you.
No, I'm not.
Right, don't let it, yeah.
I'm not saying stop it. I'm not saying anything, but in this here's report, there is nothing in there that states any of that stuff. So let's just say that you got an 80% new council next time. And sorry, but Sarah, you're the only one left here.
Everybody up, Jen.
And well,
no,
well, but I mean, as far as the planning department goes.
All right, there you go.
And Scott, so now this is going to become your vision. It's missed some of the stuff that's imperative as information for whoever's going to read it in the future to adopt this stuff. So all I'm saying is I make those points for things that should be included in this document.
Absolutely.
People actually read it, they could go.
Perfect.
Pro, con.
So how can you?
Can you or can't you do it? You need to think about this and what the cost.
Here's my question to you. As putting your housing committee councillor hat off, how can you rephrase that as a strategy recommendation to council? Considering increased density infill, consider parking and the impacts of potential off-street parking on snow removal.
That's excellent. That's excellent. That's exactly, yeah.
That's all, that's exactly.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, everybody goes and look, my biggest bitch in this community for the 20 years that I've lived here is even on the tree streets, there is no parking. In the wintertime, there is no parking anywhere on any tree streets. And when a guy shows up here and runs an Airbnb and parks his truck and trailer on the street, and another guy shows up and does the same thing, it isn't that you can weed your way around. You can't get through.
Right. So maybe we come up with, well, perhaps a strategy recommendation in considering this type of housing is that parking is in the back, right? And yards are in the front.
You don't have.
I don't know. Hey, we're spitballing ideas.
Yeah, exactly. So what is the setback on, say, let's just go for an example, the tree streets. What's the setback from the road to your property line? Is it not 3 meters?
From the road. It's from your property line,
okay,
to the front of your house. So you may actually have a lot of public property in front of your house that you're mowing and landscaping right now. It can be pretty big. I know in front of my house, it's about 3 or 4 meters. That's road. It's not my property, right? That I mow, right? So currently the way the setbacks are is it forces the house to be smack in the middle. It's a rear 6 meter setback and a front 6 meter setback. And it's reduced for accessory buildings. It can be closer, okay, in a corner, right? So you can design the zoning so that it moves a building up, right? And your regulations for parking can be parking spaces. You can have setbacks for parking spaces for that particular zone that forces it to be in the back. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And so kind of your only space left for open space would be your front yard. So you might have like a private gated patio or something like that.
You can't impede. You can only go to where the setback, to where the property line is.
As far as putting up a fence.
Right.
Yes.
Or a hedge.
It depends on what our road bylaw says.
Okay.
I know the Ministry of Transportation, which I'm more familiar with, you just can't have anything over a certain height. And it can't be like a big tree, like it's nothing that's considered to be a structure. So it'd be smaller plants, perennials, grass, right?
Okay. Jeff? Oh,
it's okay. Sorry, I don't know.
Siobhan, you're next. Siobhan, you're next.
I'm going to go to a different topic. So let's.
Okay. All right.
So in our short-term rentals, we're going, you can't park on the street. You have to park all your parking on your property, which means that ditch, which is actually in the tree streets, that is entirely the whole drainage system.
Is it though, right? So we're still talking about short-term rental regs, and that is a consideration. I know it's been brought up, like we don't want, I shouldn't say we, council has said, there's comments from some of the councillors, let me be clearer, like to see your whole front yard become a driveway access, right? So, and some of the recommendations that came on the zoning bylaw from staff inside the district, so Public Works, recommendations to consider a maximum driveway width for residential. That's, say, I think 3 meters and a total of 6 if you have 2 separate accesses, right? So it could create this scenario where you come in one access and you pull in, right? And you could potentially, there could also be regulations for short-term rental parking that require it to be in the back. Or just in general, say council's like, we don't want to see more than 2 cars parked in front of a house. Therefore, any extra parking you need, our parking regs could be more specific, right? But with short-term rentals, I mean, you've got way more people live there, typically vehicles, than you do in a residential situation, right?
If you build a 4-suiter, 4 units, and there's 2 people in there, in each one of them. That's 8 right out of the gate.
Yeah, they might have a vehicle. And I mean, I think, and I'm not saying like this, it's up to the committee to make these, to help make these strategies. It's not me. I'm just my baby. It's everybody's baby.
All the comments that I make, I just like to see it.
Yeah,
so
but like,
it comes time to actually getting serious about it.
Understand? Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I get where you're coming from. But I think like in a place like the Tree Streets, traffic is moving slower. It wouldn't be a bad thing if people were allowed to park on street. It would be a bad thing perhaps in areas where the roads are busier and there's more traffic that needs to go up and down, and where snow removal is a lot more important, like our major roads for emergency services, right? So anyway, let's not go too far down.
Right, Siobhan?
Okay, totally different thing. And I may well have missed this, Sarah. Is there a study or something that shows us what has been built? What are we building in Sycamoose over the last 5 years? Who's building what and who are they being built for?
Well, it's hard to say who they're being built for, but our housing needs assessment did look at our building permit issuances, demolitions and issuances for, I think they had to look for over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And some of our data didn't necessarily specify if a dwelling unit was a secondary suite, for example, or what was being demolished. So we don't have 100% clear data, but we do have a good idea of what's being built. And it's mostly single family homes. And it's a lot less since the 1980s, like not a lot. Scott might be able to answer more. So how many houses did we issue building permits for last year? It's all published on the website as well, our reports.
And is it new people coming in, or is it, I'm just thinking like that's, like we're talking secondary suites and granny suites and stuff like that. And if I'm downsizing from Vancouver or Calgary and I'm moving to Bayview, I'm not putting a secondary suite in. I don't want someone in my basement. I'm going to build my big, beautiful home because I just sold my house for $3 million. And so how do we then attract the developers? You know, we have to make it that people are, you know, and I know that's with taxes and stuff, but we're looking at all these kind of strategies and I'm going, okay, so, but who has been building and how do we change that then? Because that's what I have the feeling that most people who are building single family homes, right? They're not coming in to sell, not building developments, or the developments that come in, they're building for the tourists. They're not necessarily building.
My general sense is they're retirement homes and they're being built now and they're not necessarily moving into them right away, or they are. It's mostly downsizing.
Okay.
So there is some information. I can't remember if I shared it with you guys. So our housing needs assessment does go into that and look at it. It is only from 2016. So staff have been asked to update that with our current census.
Oh, we did that on the first.
Haven't done that yet.
I'm
like, I'm trying to build your agendas for you. I don't have. Okay, so we can look at that. And you can also, like, our building permit reports are issued, I think, on a monthly basis.
Every first council meeting has the building report. Yeah.
So in terms of,
I'm going, how do we move them
there? In terms of who's living there, again, like we would look at that through our census information and our tax rolls, right? So, but it's not something that's necessarily that I can share with you specifically. I can share general information with you. So I think there was over 100 dwelling units as of our most recent tax roll in January that were second homes.
Right.
Now, as to whether or not they're vacant second homes that are recreational or they're tenanted, we can't really tell that. And that's where we cross-reference with our statistics from Stats Canada. Yeah, to give us an idea. But we know our housing gaps are these specific groups, right? Families not able to find anything, you know, being evicted seasonally, short-term rentals, seasonal workers, like, you know, local employers can't bring them in because they can't find housing. So a lot was identified through stakeholder consultation on the housing needs assessment. Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed on Facebook, and I know you're on there either on the Sycamoose community or Rant and Rave, is that's where often people will reach out where the residents that they've been renting, or the home that they've been renting for the last 8 years, the owners have decided to pull out their investment, and they may not even live, the people who own that home could be in another part of the country, and they've just decided to capitalize on the real estate market right now and just sell. And so whether or not the new owner is going to continue the rental agreement is another question, but I feel like that's where I see panic in residents. You know, it's like, I've got a job here, but I may not be able to stay because I have no place to live. And that's
thing too, because they'll say how much they can afford. And you're like, why don't you have a mortgage? That's a mortgage. But nothing is being sold that is in their price bracket, which is about $350.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it's like, we have strategies for mortgage helpers.
But I mean, I think the big thing too is how are we going to get the developers to come in and build deep? Like, if the lots are being put up and anything being built is being built as a second home, or someone that's, you know, retiring down here or whatever, then how do we push people into either building a duplex or putting in a granny suite, or because that doesn't seem that the people that are building here now, that they're not interested in that. They're not coming in, you know, people in Prince George, let's say, built development because they're going to make money. Because they've, you know, there's lots of people coming in for construction and stuff like that. So how do we get that?
Question? Yeah, so I have come across some strategies. One was having, as part of your application package, a checklist that helps the applicant consider these kinds of factors. Like, how does your proposal meet our housing needs strategy? Like, are you proposing a secondary suite? Did you know that there are these incentives, right? Development cost charges are waived for the suite specifically, not for the main house. So we still get DCCs. There's a tax incentive, like we will give you a tax break on this percentage of your taxes because you've put in a suite. We're still going to take taxes, but right? So we can build in incentives so that it's a voluntary.
Yeah.
The only places where we're going to get a minimum number of units are probably in our higher density zones, where it's like, it's not zoned for single family dwelling. You can't build a single family dwelling there. You got to build at least 3 units or do a zoning amendment, which is something we went through on Temple. That's like, the guy had to go through a zoning amendment to do a single family home on a multifamily lot, right? So, okay, Jeff, comment?
Unfortunately, I have another thing I have to go for. Supposed to be there 10 minutes ago. But,
okay.
So I'm just gonna, this isn't pointed at the district or this is housing committee or the rest of it. It's just the way people think. We all think we're doing a wonderful thing. So we came up with a $3.6 million grant to give to a housing society to build some units 5 years ago. And the fight's on. We could have repurposed that money and probably had as many as 50 homes built already. By saying if you lived here and worked here, we would bank $5 an hour for you. So after 2 years, you would basically have $20,000 to put down on a house. And that property would be independently owned, pay property taxes, would get the DCCs waived, none of that stuff would happen. Alternately, you could take, depending on what happens, but let's just say you had $1 million and you went around and you said, okay, anybody who wants to build a carriage house, we're going to contribute $25,000 to it and disperse of all the fees. Now, if you went to BC Housing and said, look, if you front up $25,000, you're going to get this many people, right? So you're going to end up with 40 carriage suites that are going to have to be rented out at $400 or $500 a month. Now that to me makes sense. You can kick your tires all over the place as far as you want, but There's nobody in this community going to build something that's going to be, they'll build it for their mother-in-law or their father-in-law or a relative or maybe their kid. But to build it and rent it to a stranger without having any incentive, just repurpose the money that the government's trying to give away. Make it that it's available to somebody, and then you scatter it throughout the community, which helps the community. It does a lot of things for the community, but you're never going to convince me ever that sitting down and trying to build because there's nobody going to do it. In the city of Calgary, all the attainable, affordable, low-income housing that is there is all done by the city of Calgary. If you build a cottage in the city of Calgary, you can take your garage, knock the roof off of it, put a second floor on there and make a carriage suite out of it, basically.
Okay. Oh, is there? Okay. All right.
It's just like I believe that we need affordable housing. I just believe that we should.
Like as someone who's just entered the housing market and bought my first house, I'm putting in a suite. I have to.
Yeah.
It's the only way for me to make that happen, regardless of my experiences in the past with tenants. Yeah, but I know there's a large tenant pool and, you know, I can try to get someone who's going to be a good fit.
And it's different if you live there.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I'm saying that the cottage house at the back of a property with an incentive of $20,000 or $25,000, you'd be surprised how many of them will get done. And your housing need goes away.
Well, I believe there's a program for that. The Housing Hub has that for developers to, they're incentivizing private developers to provide housing solutions as well. They're not just working with governments and municipalities.
Actually, yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, like, you know, council could take some of the funds from the housing fund and create a grant program directed at people putting in carriage houses.
I think that
for things like replacing their toilets or creating that facade on Main Street.
First,
be a strategy.
For a specific purpose, though, it has to meet that rental need, right? And it does a lot of things. It expands your community, source of income to the individual. I'm going to tell you right now, $500,000 the interest rates, you're going to be paying $3,500 for a mortgage payment. And there's nobody can afford that.
Okay. Recommendation that, are we done? Sarah, is that good for now? Okay.
Are you going to call it?
Yes. A recommendation that the Housing Committee meeting for May the 19th, 22 be adjourned at the time being 2:38. All in favor?
Sorry, the first one I showed up to, I wanted to sit quietly.
That's impossible.
we didn't have mail.
So I will tell you, right, look at this attachment to the agenda. It's a really great presentation. Examples of strategies from all over, mostly from the States. I think I'm more Alberta. Really interesting idea.
Is that in just an email on its own?
I know.
Is that a separate email?
No, it's attached to the agenda.
Okay, I'm gonna
the items, and they're just slides.